So what's your abort technique? What's your choice for trying to figure out what a rejected takeoff? Today on FlyWire, Dan Gryder and I are going to take a look at that. Hi, I'm Scott Perdue, and today on FlyWire we're going to talk about aborted takeoffs, rejected takeoffs, something that you do in the airlines and in big airplanes all the time, and you really should be doing them in little airplanes, but we don't talk about it much. We're going to use an accident that was fairly recent that to kind of highlight that abort decision. I've got Dan Gryder here with me. He's vagabonding around the world right now, so he's come out and we're going to work on this today.
That's right, Scott. Good to see you.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks for having me on. And you know, it is interesting to note that the FAA doesn't have any criteria in their ACS, PTS material, or even the training concerning the rejected takeoff for us single engine guys. General aviation single engine doesn't even get an honorable mention on rejected takeoff. Isn't that something?
I think it's yes, that is something. It's really, it's an area that we need to pay attention to, because there are times when, hey, I should not even go try to fly here. Something's wrong, and I have to have a metric, some kind of thing that tells me that I don't reach this point and I can abort.
Exactly. And on a super long runway, it doesn't make a lot of difference, but we can get down to some of the critical runways that we fly our little airplanes off of. You need a really good red flag on when to chop that throttle, and this is not going to work. When do we know it's not going to work? And once we do know this is not going to work, close the throttle, let's get on the brakes.
That's right.
Rejected takeoff.
Yeah, try to save yourself. Let's go figure out what happened, and then sort it out. Either try again, or that's it for today.
Yeah, and if you notice, like the accident in Corona, the penalty for continuing is a ball of fire. You're either going to hit power lines or trees or go off an embankment. You're going to die once you get past that point and try to make it go when you should have stopped. So knowing when to stop is critical, and getting some training on how do we know when to determine when to stop. Where does that information come from?
Yeah, where does that information come from? And you're not going to find it in your POH, basically. Some type clubs have guidance to do that,
right,
but not that many. So it's really airplane dependent, and in your airplane dependent.
Yeah.
And what's your gross weight today? What's your performance? Is it a high density altitude takeoff, high gross weight?
Yeah.
All these factors come into play. So it's good to have an idea of when you need to make that decision.
Yeah, exactly. And the unfortunate Corona accident, some of the factors, preliminary factors at least, that came out, apparently a downwind takeoff and high gross weight, probably at or near, maybe even a little bit above gross takeoff weight, 3,200 foot runway, and on an A36, I'm sorry, but it's a ground loving airplane. It's going to take some distance under those conditions. You got to do it just right. I think we ought to go try and replicate what they did and try a couple different techniques and just take a look at our time to get aloft and our distance to get aloft, but let's use a long runway.
I think we're going to use a real long runway. Even this here at Denton is not long enough for me. I'm a wimp. We're going to go to Alliance. They've got 11,000 feet, and that's kind of more my speed. So
let's go over and try a downwind takeoff at Alliance.
Let's do, if they'll let us do that,
yeah,
we'll do that. But we're pretty close to gross weight. We're pretty close to what that airplane should have been.
Yeah.
So we're within about 100 pounds of gross weight today.
Yep.
So we should get some pretty good numbers and a metric maybe that you can use, or use the template to develop a metric for your airplane and the way you fly.
That's right. All right, let's go do it.
Let's do it.
649 Alpha.
Takeoff, takeoff, here we go.
Roger, that's approved westbound. The wind variable at 6, altimeter 3000. 3000. Transition to make it 619 Alpha.
Okay.
Stand tower, Skyhawk 13180, RNAV 36.
How's the brake gear up?
2.1.
You rotated at 20.2 seconds.
I did, okay.
Approaches in, yes.
Yeah, it got light a few seconds before that, but the main section came off at 20.2.
Okay. That's a good number.
That's our fish.
I'll write it down for me. I have a terrible memory.
All right.
20 at 6.
I don't have a pen with me.
It's right there.
Oh, okay.
2.11.
I see you steal pens from FBOs, don't you?
Of course.
Yes. Landing departure runway 34.
Probably go in there and drink their coffee and eat their cookies too.
With 8 destination Quebec.
Let me start off by saying that I'm not trying to speculate about the mistakes that were made in the Corona accident. This accident highlights the consequences for a takeoff gone horribly wrong, and we need to explore the important concepts of takeoff, abort, and rejected takeoff. My heart and my prayers go out to the folks on the airplane and their families, but we have to learn from what happened to them so we can avoid it happening to others in the future. So stick with me, because they're important. There are some important things we can learn from this accident, and as pilots we need to focus on those things that keep killing folks. We have to raise awareness and commitment to good aeronautical decision making. Going forward, we, I mean that as a community, need to double down on tackling the hard stuff if we want to keep our freedom to fly. It's just a reality, we need to do it. In today's world, there's so many pressures, and we have to work as hard as we can here. The long and the short of this accident was that the airplane failed to reach flying speed in the available runway. We'll never know what actually happened inside that airplane during that takeoff roll, and speculations rolling around the interweb miss the point as far as I can see. We need to examine the facts of this accident to elicit some very important takeaways. My perspective is that procedures are written in blood, and I think that we are respectful if we learn the important lessons from our forebears, from those who've gone before us. For heavy airplanes, given the same density altitude, operating on a long runway gives you lots of margin in takeoff performance. For a runway 4,500 feet or less, near gross weight, you have very little margin. You and your airplane need to be on your A game with a plan, and that is what I'd like to highlight today. Planning considerations and metrics so that we can use them in the real world. Posit, if you will, a very heavy 36 model Bonanza. Wonderful airplane, and for the GA single roll, capable of very high gross weights. And it's pretty speedy as well. A lot of fun to fly. But let's consider a gross weight of about 3,830 pounds. Looking at the AGO, the AFD listed at 3,200 feet, but it has displaced threshold at both ends. And if you line up on the white line, you only have 3,000 feet of runway. What would you taxi to the end and use every foot available of this particular runway? Just something to think about whenever you take a runway on a fairly short one. You know, do you use the whole runway, or do you go to displaced threshold just because it's convenient? Using my Bonanza performance app on my phone, which does a great job of calculating performance numbers from actual POH data. Really good stuff, highly recommended. But for a while now, I've been working on the conclusion that POH numbers are optimistic for my airplane, probably just about all of them. Generally, I've been seeing performance 25 to 30% less than the book, and that is with the new IO 550 in Whiskey Bravo. Anyway, let's take a look at the POH predictions for the heavy Bonanza. It would seem that a VR of 65 knots and a distance of 1,250 feet would see this bow in the air. My gut tells me that on a good day, it would really be more like 1,560 feet. Turbocharged airplanes closer to sea level typically experience a little loss in initial horsepower, so let's call it 1,720 instead. That's more than half the available runway, which in my mind equates to a short runway. Remember, you have to have runway available to stop as well as go. So, early eyewitness reports are a bit all over the map right now, and frankly, not germane to the overriding issue in my mind, and that is that takeoff and abort. Speaking to takeoff technique, if you do a rolling takeoff, you might eat up as much as 1,000 feet before the turbo's up to speed. If you attempt to take off with 10 knots of tailwind, then the hit is even worse. The POH gives you a penalty of about 50% on distance. But I want to know what the real world numbers are, since that's where I live right now.
Yeah, just when you hit 73.
Yeah, that's just back pressure time.
Right.
It's not liftoff.
It's still very heavy, and it takes a little while for that ground loving airplane to actually commit to coming up off the ground. But
Yeah, and I think that's a real important point that we need to think about. People need to think about it, just how long it actually takes, to get inside that moment.
Yeah. Well, you got roughly 15 seconds till it says it's ready to fly, and then when you give it the command to fly, it's going to be another 5 seconds beyond that it actually does.
Yeah. Okay, just to rebrief, what we're thinking about doing here is we'll get down to the end just like a normal takeoff. We'll line up, we'll do a high speed, we'll count it up to 73, and then rotate, and when it starts to get light, we'll abort the takeoff.
Okay. Alright, so this will be once again, a zero flap. What do you want to do on elevator position for this one? Simulating what they did in Corona, what do you want to add to the mix to worsen your condition? You already got a downwind takeoff scenario at gross weight. What do you want to do on elevator?
Well, he's talking about my contention is that there's an issue with the elevator, letting it loose, and nose starts to porpoise when it gets some air on the elevator because you're not holding back neutral. So I think that was a factor in that Corona accident. Yeah, who can tell right now, but I do. And so I want to test that out.
Okay.
Should we test it out on this one or on the takeoff, the other direction?
Well, if we've got the time, I propose doing two of them. End up back here again for a second high-speed southbound, except on that one, make a takeoff. See what I did with the nose right there?
Yeah.
Make a takeoff with this elevator all the way back, and note the amount of time it takes for this thing to begin to get light.
Okay, and then given that, then we should do the elevator, loose on this one.
Okay. All right.
2 Mike Foxtrot, range 34 right.
All right, you got 11,000 feet of runway, so everything looks good. And just to confirm, we're not going flying, but your before takeoff checks is all complete anyway.
It is.
Okay.
Trim is set. All right, here we go.
What's your winds now?
Wind 010
The elevator is actually trimming on this airplane, didn't on the Baron. There's 73. Power. Well, that was really interesting.
The other thing you could do, since you're back down here with runway available, you could do an approach flap takeoff into the wind and just show how short the thing will get airborne if you use proper technique. If you make a takeoff with elevator neutral, approach flaps, full power, you'll get airborne as quick as can possibly be done. That's your best case scenario in this thing.
Okay. We will do that.
2 Mike Foxtrot, I'll call you left turn out.
All right, let's verify. Elevator trim is good. Approach flaps are set.
Bonanza Whiskey Bravo, range 34 left, clear for the option, the go left, close, try pattern, approve.
Clear for the option for 34 left with west close, take Whiskey Bravo.
All right, let's put your elevator to neutral, which is right about there. There you go. Yep, I'm ready when you are. Time to start. Wind check.
Wind 360 at 6.
Seconds to 73. Off we go. Monterey, gear up. Flaps. I delayed a little bit, so I didn't get off as quickly as I probably could have.
Right, but you were still, marker-wise, you were still inside of 2,500 feet easily. You're into the wind with approach flaps, and it was easily getting light just past 2,000. You rotated at about 2,500. That's just a guess by looking at the markers out there. So big difference on that.
So I figured, let's take a look at some of the takeoff tests in Whiskey Bravo. First is a normal heavyweight takeoff to set a baseline. and then we'll do a downwind takeoff with elevator left to ride free. I have a pet theory that this would result in more drag and porpoising, resulting in a longer takeoff roll. I've actually seen this happen with students before. Spoiler alert, it didn't happen. It wasn't an issue. After that, and we'll do an into the wind takeoff with half flaps for a short field takeoff. A caveat here is that approach flaps are fine for takeoff in A36, but they're not recommended for B36 TC or a Bear for slightly different reasons. Your mileage, of course, may always vary. Then we'll do another downwind takeoff with the elevator held full aft to get the nose into the air in a somewhat common short field technique. Not a great technique, but people do it. This is Dan's theory for the prolonged takeoff roll at the Corona. Corona accident eyewitnesses reported the nose bouncing before the airplane got in the air and then settled back on the ground. Finally, I know that we'll do another normal takeoff just to see what the effect of 60 pounds might have. You know, that's not very much. I don't expect much difference. But before I get into the results of the flight test, I want to take a quick look at the 2018 NAL report. AOPA's Air Safety Institute puts this out every year to report on GA accidents. But one thing to remember is that it lacks the real world by about 3 to 5 years, and so is limited in usefulness in highlighting contemporary trends, what's happening now or the last year. There seem to be an average of about 1,000 accidents per year, of which 20% are fatal. Single engine fixed gears account for 75% of those accidents, but only 60% of fatalities. Single engine retracts chalked up 20% of the accidents and 32% of the fatalities, which means that a retract airplane is statistically more dangerous to crash in. The vast majority of these accidents are in day VMC. Takeoff and landing accidents account for 36% of all accidents, and for the takeoff climb accidents, loss of control and stalls resulted in 70% of those. My nickel is that we can do good by focusing on those areas where pilots get into square corners with a little in the way of options, like we had in Corona. The baseline takeoff was about 1,250 feet. The short field takeoff was about 18% better than the baseline. A downwind takeoff with sloppy technique, we'll call that elevator, chewed up about 36% more runway. But the real eye-opener was holding the nose in the air, trying to improve short field performance, and it added a whopping 70% to the takeoff roll. All I got to say is yikes.
All right, so on this one, if you roll down the runway with this nose all the way up like this, when it does get to flying speed, it is going to want to come up. So you got to be ready to unload it so that it doesn't aggressively go up, which I believe is probably what they did. But when the nose came up and the main started to lift off, they went back forward again with it, and that just depends on how you do it. But it's going to settle back down. But having the elevator out of position and the wing presenting the max amount of deflection, the max amount of obstruction to oncoming air via the angle. It's not the wing is not streamlined during takeoff, and neither is the elevator doing it that way. And that's all drag. It's all drag.
Exceeding the critical angle of attack.
Yeah, you're trying to make the wing. It's like trying to make a boat go through the water with the bow in the air. It's pushing all that water. It never planes out. So we did a very nice takeoff into the wind with approach flaps, and the thing leaps off the ground. Now a downwind takeoff without flaps, with the elevator all the way back, is a pronounced difference between the two. All right, just to confirm, we're not going flying, but in the case we do, you're all set anyway for takeoff checks. So good, your trim's good, all that's set, so you're...
Okay, no flap, stick all the way back.
Hey, Whiskey Bravo, ready back, taxi 34 left. Her, yeah.
Hey, Whiskey Bravo, Roger, proceed, request back, taxi running 34 left.
Hey, Whiskey Bravo.
Grab your window. There you go. All right, I got your timer.
Ready?
Yep. Yeah, see that nose coming up?
Yeah.
Look how slow the airspeed is to accelerate. Now it's wanting to.
It wants to fly.
It wants
here.
to fly, but see, you're still stalled, and it's hanging right there at 73. And you lifted off the ground 3 inches, but you're back down. But look how long it took. That airspeed kind of hung right there.
It took 30, about 2,500 feet. Yeah.
Yeah, you're asking a lot of the airframe in that technique. That thing is fully stalled. You even got the stall horn with the angle of attack like that. It won't fly. It's got to get the acceleration, then fly. Isn't that interesting?
It is. It is. That's pretty significant. Just plows.
It just plows, and for a second there, it looked like you had a hung airspeed indicator. It just kind of stopped right there.
Did it really?
Yeah.
I wasn't looking at it.
The point is for your viewers know where you are and what you're trying to do, and if you're up against if you're under the gun here to make this happen, then you got to use best technique. Use absolute best technique. This airplane will fly in less than 3,000 feet, but the pilot has to know that technique and apply it in order to make it work, or you are going off the end.
Yeah. And have your decision points.
Know your decision points.
10 Tower, 8 Whiskey Bravo is ready for takeoff 34 left, and I'll be departing out of your pattern to the north to Denton. Thank you.
3 Whiskey Bravo, copy range 34 left, clear for takeoff.
Clear for takeoff 34 left for 8 Whiskey Bravo. Appreciate it.
Wind check.
Wind 350 at 6.
And that amount of distance is profoundly affected by...
Whiskey Bravo, squawk VFR and then right turn out to Denton's approved.
He squawk VFR and right turn out for Denton 8 Whiskey Bravo. Thank you.
That's with only the difference of a 5-knot headwind and a 5-knot tailwind. That's all we got down there. If we'd had a full 10 or 12 knots, your difference would have been 20.
Takeoff is important. Technique is important. And with those results in mind, I'd personally like to have a metric to use in gauging my airplane's takeoff performance. Basically, I want to know when to quit trying to take off and when to start trying to concentrate on trying to stop. The Bonanza Performance app puts a little entry in there at the very bottom called the estimated accelerated stop distance. This is an important number. It really is. The fancy term for this is the accelerated stop distance, or ASD. FAA talks about that. In the big jet world, they pay a lot of attention to this, being able to stop on a high-speed, heavyweight airplane on a runway. That's why they're like really long runways. So in the GA world, especially in single engine, we don't think about it that much. Honestly, we don't. Rarely talk about it. If the engine quits, you look for a place. And for me, that's a bit too simplistic. For today's number, the BAP estimated ASD is 2,880 feet, which means everything has to work perfectly on what is basically a 3,000-foot runway. Well, you can approximate that number by adding the takeoff roll to the landing distance, because you won't find any of this in the POH. For me, again, that's too simplistic as well. You've got to add a reaction time, which is accompanied by distance, by the way. Perhaps in 5 seconds, you might traverse 500 feet. So being conservative into the wind, you might see this balanced, it's called a balanced field, at 3,380 feet for a 3,200-foot runway or a 3,000-foot runway. If you took off downwind, the situation would be way worse. See what I mean by being on your A game here? What might your planning choices be? Wait for cooler temps, offload fuel or load? Definitely some choices need to be made here. All that is well and good, but in a way, it really doesn't help us on the actual takeoff roll. What we need is something to hang our hat on as a decision point to stop the takeoff and start the big stop. Yeah, I'm sure there are lots of techniques, and most are related to distance required. The one good one is the 50-70 rule, and that's a common one. It's a good one that says your decision point would see you achieving 70% or greater of your takeoff speed by 50% of the runway remaining. If you don't, then you have to pull the power and jump on the brakes. It requires you to figure out where the midpoint is and or count centerline stripes. they're about 200 feet from the beginning of one stripe to the beginning of the other. 120 feet for the stripe, 80 feet for the gap. From my perspective, the issue with this technique is you have to concentrate on something that's not engine airspeed and alignment related. You have to divide your attention. And we're supposed to be good at that, right? But it adds a complication to an already task-saturated event. And not every airport has centerline stripes. So, see what I mean? You got to pick your technique, and maybe you have to be a little flexible. Another way, and that's what I use, is counting in your head to a predetermined speed. I learned this a time, anyway, to a predetermined speed. I learned this in the USAF. I didn't invent it. And for this Bonanza, I should hit rotation speed in about 13 seconds, depending on weight and density altitude. That works even when there are no stripes on the runway, but some might also find it distraction. You could set a timer, put in 13 or 17 seconds or whatever, to count down the seconds, and if you don't reach a predetermined speed when the timer expires, then you abort. Something like that. Find a metric, or find a way to measure that. A couple of considerations I want to mention on the abort are important. If you jump on the brakes, you might lock them and blow a tire. If you blow one, it's best to blow both if you want to stay on the runway. The best braking technique is to put pressure on the brakes with increasing force as you slow down. At high speeds and weights, the brakes are not as effective as they are at slow speeds. Plus, heat's an issue. Do not pump the brakes. One continuous press. And you may want to pull the mixture off. This is a little radical. Pull the mixture off, shut the engine down, and that'll help you slow down, I guarantee it. This stuff can get complicated, and trying to figure it out on the fly is risky at best. And that's really what point I'm trying to make here, is that go out and try this, preferably on a very long runway, and what kind of performance can you do? What kind of metric works for you to trigger the abort? Something you put in your tool bag as you go along. Maybe it's a Boy Scout thing, I don't know. Be prepared, right? I think it's best to think about stuff like this on the ground and make up your plan with your feet up on the coffee table instead of trying to figure out what to do when your hair is on fire. Anyway, that's just me.
That was fun.
That was great, Scott, and my endorsement for your channel. You're doing really good work on YouTube with your FlyWire channel for Bonanza and Baron owners, and the technical information you're putting out. It takes a lot of work to do what you're doing, but you're doing a great job, and I appreciate your channel. Your stuff is clean, well edited, and very concise, really good information, and my highest endorsement for Scott's channel. And hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and give him some support for the material that he's putting out. Great job, man.
Appreciate it. Thanks a lot. That was a great close. You need to have your own channel.
Nah, I'm not doing a channel. No. I can't operate my phone. I like radial engines and VORs and ADF approaches.
I hear you.
I'm not doing any of this electronic stuff.
Well, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on FlyWire.